Okay, hello, and welcome to today's webinar from eCampus News. Today's topic is Back to Campus, how higher education are making moves to post-pandemic get back in and get kids back into class, whether that means in person or remote. My name is Kevin Hogan. I'm editor-at-large at eSchool News and eCampus News, and I'm glad you're here with us today. Today's webinar is sponsored by UKG, Ultimate Kronos Group. This group is built from a merger that created one of the largest cloud companies in the world. UKG believes organizations succeed when they focus on their people. As a leading global provider of HCM, payroll, HR service delivery, and workforce management solutions, UKG's award-winning Pro, Dimensions, and Ready solutions help tens of thousands of organizations across geographies and in every industry drive better business outcomes, improve HR effectiveness, streamline the payroll process, and help make work a better, more connected experience for everyone. With me here today is a panel of EdTech industry veterans that I know will provide some great insights into our topic. First, up top, Mandy Cole. Mandy is the Assistant Vice President for Operations Strategy and the Director of the Administrative Support Center at Kansas State University. As the founding director of Administrative Support Center, Mandy has been responsible for the creation and implementation of shared services for accounting and HR at Kansas State. The shared services effort has included many initiatives to identify process inefficiencies and bring efficiency efforts to fruition. Prior to this role, Mandy served as Associate Director in the Budget Office, where she maintained the university budget and provided budget support to departments across campus. Mandy, thanks for joining us. Also today is John Mccabe. John is Director of Higher Education Sales at UKG, contributing to the digital transformation of colleges and universities across the US through automation of human capital management and workforce management processes. With over 10 years in the higher education space, John knows the ins and outs of modernizing in a campus environment. John, also, thanks for joining us today for this conversation.
Kevin.
I guess as with most conversations begin in 2020 and 2021 is, where do we begin? Especially when you think about education and the disruptions that have occurred. We're almost coming up to the year anniversary now of what a lot of educators call that Friday the 13th was when things really just went into free fall and university campuses were shutting down. Some campuses were already on spring break, others were just beginning to go on spring break. And that was just the beginning of this tumultuous period that we're having. And I think higher education, as much as K-12 had their problems, has even more of a disruption occurring and continuing to occur with worries about what students are going to come back, how they're going to come back, whether they feel it's worth it to come back. And I guess this kind of brings us to trend number one, that there isn't a university out there that doesn't have budgetary pressures right now. And they're trying to look in every nook and cranny to find efficiencies and to find cost savings in order to bring them along to the students who are sitting in their parents' in their old bedroom at their parents' house saying, why am I spending this much for university education? Mandy, maybe you can start and talk about your own experiences with Kansas State when it comes to this.
Yeah, Kevin, so as you've mentioned, we've really seen declining support from many states over the last several years, and have seen some enrollment numbers declining as well. And I think COVID just really exacerbated that. Suddenly we were dealing with questions about what's fair to charge a student who might be only online and can't experience our campus culture and a lot of the campus facilities that we're able to offer. For us, it really forced us to think about efficiencies. And so how can we be more efficient as an institution to focus more of our resources on really the pillars of higher education, which as a land grant for us, right, are research, service, and instruction. So that's really been our focus in the last year is how do we continue life in the pandemic? How do we continue to serve our students and all of the really critical things that make higher ed so valuable, while absorbing a lot of these budget cuts and reductions. So John, I don't know if you have seen anything from other institutions kind of that tailors to that.
Yeah, we definitely have, Mandy. It reminds me about 5 years ago, I was at a conference, and Brian Alexander, who's I guess he calls himself a futurist, spoke about the enrollment declines that were coming based on the early 2000s financial crisis that hit the US, and it really dropped down the birth rate. And now that clip that was expected to happen in the mid 2020s at around 24, 25 has sped up, right? And I think a lot of that has happened the last 2 or 3 years with people questioning the value of higher education. And now, like you said, more so, I think from a parent's perspective, their kid isn't off at college where they don't think about every day the money they're spending every month sending that check. It is sitting, like Kevin said, in the basement or in their old room, painful rate for the schooling, right? So there's a lot of people questioning that, and and COVID has just really kind of made that more prevalent for every organization. A lot of other trends, that you can probably speak to as well, as a lot of colleges merging, right? From here in New Hampshire, the governor recently put a proposal forward to merge the community colleges and the 4-year state colleges together to try to create efficiencies. And a lot of that really comes back to operational efficiency and that shared services model that a lot of state schools are going to. A lot of larger schools are trying to determine where can they find the most efficiency to operate better, right? It's something that colleges have been thinking about for a long time. And now in the past year, like Kevin said, since Friday the 13th, they've had to put a lot of thought process behind that. And now we're getting close to the time where they have to get ready to have kids come back on campus. And that shared services model and finding those efficiencies in technology and process, I know that's something that's kind of close to your heart. And I'd love to hear a little bit what K-State has done in the past that have probably prepared your college, your university better to handle this pandemic.
Yeah, I don't know, that we felt like we were better prepared than anyone else. But certainly, we've really been thinking about efficiencies, particularly administrative efficiencies, for several years. Shared services was one effort to realize those efficiencies. So really consolidation of our accounting and HR functions across multiple units to provide a higher level of service with some more expertise staff, as well as to find efficiencies in that. So to implement processes that would allow us to actually reduce the number of staff needed or reduce the operational burden for administration. And really that all goes back to prioritizing, right, student instruction and the student experience and research and service for us. Some specific ways that we've worked on that have really been around workflow and process. So implementing electronic processes, like you mentioned, John, really taking advantage of some of the technology that's available. In our, real effort hasn't been about necessarily reducing staff. It's about freeing up staff to prioritize other mission critical initiatives for the institution. So we have moved the staff that we need to actually get the work done for administration and have left staff in the units so that they're able to really shift their job responsibilities to be unit focused and continue to really fulfill the mission critical aspects of K-State. And that's an ongoing effort for us. So we've been working on that. We're still working on it now. Right now, we're in the middle of a large implementation of electronic time and leave, right, university-wide, because we think there's efficiency to be found there in the administrative area and a real value in allowing our staff to focus across the academic units, especially to focus on really the student mission, student support. We've also been just thinking about things that remote work have brought to bear for us that maybe we weren't as attuned to pre-pandemic, right? There's a culture of paper routing and wet signatures, right? We've never really figured out electronic workflow for those. And so it just forced us to realize maybe we don't need that. We've not had it for a year, right? We've found other ways. And so how do we now institutionalize that? What's the best way? and what efficiencies can we create there by maybe thinking differently about our work and really just continuing remote work. How could that provide efficiency to the institution? Where is that the value for the institution there? And how do we sort of deploy some of those efforts? So that's kind of what we've been working on at K-State. It's a work in progress. We're trying to pick, one thing at a time and get something done and find a little more efficiency for our institution.
Yeah, I was recently reading an MIT Sloan piece about digital transformation. And one of the things that they talked about is the unrealistic expectations that sometimes people have with that. And not kind of looking at their process and doing almost like a Kaizen session on, just because there's 8 people in a paper process doesn't mean all 8 need to be in that electronic process, right? Making sure that you're giving transparency and fairness to everybody of what the processes are going to be, that paper's not going to come across their desk anymore, but they can still see what is happening. A lot of schools we talk to, that's one of the main concerns is people feel like they might lose the oversight, being part of that process, which is, you want to make sure that as we transition potentially to a more remote workforce in higher ed or partial, people are still feeling part of the process, right? And just because they're not on campus and they're not sitting next to their friend in the cubicle next to them, they're still part of that process. They understand what's happening with this transformation. And it's not about riffs, like you said, right? You're not trying to replace people. You're trying to replace the process and then put them in a more mission critical position to do things that are going to, at the end of the day, it's about educating students, right? And doing research and everybody in the college in a better position to make that happen.
Yeah, and you're right. I think even just through our shared service effort in accounting specifically, I've heard from some department heads, they feel more disconnected because the staff sits in my office and really a lot of that routing is happening in our office and they're seeing reports, but it's not the same as what they used to see when they were getting the question about every purchase and about every payment, right? And one thing that we think electronic processing can help us do is bring them back in the loop for those who are interested without creating additional burden. So it doesn't have to slow down the process, but all of a sudden they can get a CC that before when we had to scan a document, send an email, right, was harder to do. Now it can be in a system. And if they want to have the ability to go in that system and see it, they can. And we can trigger a communication, once a week to say, hey, there's stuff out there that's new, that kind of thing. So we're really excited about the possibilities of maybe not just being more efficient, but finding a way to, engage the right people at the right time and really help people to see what's happening in their department, but without taking a ton of, effort for them to do that work.
Yeah, exactly. And that digital transformation that you're making is key. And especially when it comes to if you have people that are remote, right, giving them the ability to interact with HR or other departments when they want to and when they're able to, because maybe their hours are going to shift or as the workforce demographics change, when people want to interact is not necessarily when the office hours are for accounting or for human resources. So giving folks that ability to, from their phone, from their tablet, from their PC, be at home and look at the HR policies with their spouse, with their partner, et cetera. So it's really key that institutions are thinking about that and kind of evolving with the trends that are going on out there in society, in which I think now, like we'll probably talk about more and more, COVID has just kind of brought forward that need for more digital transformation, digital evolution, especially in higher ed.
Yeah, and that all helps support, really some really great compliance needs and audit needs in having a single system of record and being able to really find those things, not just for department heads like we talked about, really at the institutional level. When we've got paper documents, it's on every department to maintain those in a paper file somewhere and to be able to produce those when asked. And so I think there's some really great opportunities through the work that we're doing to find efficiency, but that will also help really support us institutionally be able to meet growing compliance and regulatory needs and really just be able to function at the institutional level more efficiently there as well.
Exactly. And I think as we transform and you have people that might work in different states, what are the implications for information about, the compliance or regulatory, if they're on Zoom, what are the requirements in that state? That you can't just, I'm going to record this. Maybe you can do that in Kansas, but maybe you can't do it in Missouri or Texas, where you might have a remote employee doing that that comes in 1 day a week, but the rest of the time they're at home. And there are certain things you can't do. And then what are the tax implications in that state? So there's a lot of mitigating factors that for you're going to have to start, or already have started thinking about on campus.
Yeah. Yeah. And we've really been thinking about those things. So as we continue remote work, what's our goal maybe for remote work, and how that benefits our employees, how that benefits the institution, what some of the challenges of that are going. You're right, just different states. So I know some private industries have put in place policies to limit that, and we've got to wrap our heads around that, which I think really is a challenge that higher ed is going to have to face here as we start to come back to work, return to campus.
Great point.
So lots of insights already in that, and wanted to point out to the audience, I neglected in the introduction, if you have a question for our panelist, or if you have an opinion or a thought on what's being said, be sure to put it into the Q&A at the lower portion of your screen. I assume we're all Zoom friendly at this point, so you should be able to find that no problem. But we also want to ask the audience a question. What are the main drivers for continuing remote work at your institution? Does it involve the budget? Does it involve efficiency, employee experience, space, larger candidate pool, modernization? Give us your thoughts on there. We'll give you a few minutes to kind of go through that list. I guess we could have added in all the above, right? I mean, there's so many different aspects that are happening, but we'll save that one for the next one. So we'll give it a few seconds for that and see what comes of that. And Mandy, all these aspects were there before the pandemic, right? I mean, the pandemic has just kind of accelerated these needs. These were already kind of in the bucket of needs that you had, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, some of these things, they just kind of took a back seat institutionally when we prioritized something like working on electronic signatures. An investment of resources there maybe wasn't a huge priority when we were all on campus, and it sort of was seen as it'd be nice to have, but not essential, right? When we went to remote work suddenly overnight, it became a huge deal that how are we signing documents, right?
Right.
And it was a big deal to get that kind of figured out. And now to figure out, okay, now how do we really create the right process? Because we basically just said, do whatever you can do. We had people sign and then take a picture with their phone and email it back from their phone pictures,
right?
Whatever it took. But we're a year in now. And so we've started talking about, okay, what kind of process do we really need?
Yeah, there needs to be standardization at some point, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But so you can see the poll results here. I would say I'm not a data analyst, but that's pretty evenly split. And I will suspect that all those have a little element for everyone who's watching. So that's good. So we're on target here. Trend number 2, staff morale assuming a greater urgency in the way in which these systems are managed. And we could talk about how increased employee fatigue is really a costly turnover. A lot of the coverage that I've been doing has focused on the student and their social emotional learning and the aspects of that. But there's another aspect to this: faculty as well as administration. I mean, we're all in this one big existential crisis, right? Even with our personal lives as well as our professional lives. So to have kind of these basic traumas of whether or not you need to sign something in person or take it to your phone. I mean, these are all things that are adding to the frustrations of the day. So Mandy, maybe you and John can talk a little bit about how, and it's kind of an antithetical thing to think about, but how an information system can help relieve trauma in the day-to-day workplace.
Yeah, and I think, I would just say, I think for much of higher ed, it's true that because of the declining budget we kind of talked about earlier, we've been seeing less staff for some time, right? Positions haven't been refilled, those sorts of things. So this sort of strain on the existing employees was going on before the pandemic. And so people were already feeling like they were doing a lot more with a lot less, and really were. And so then throwing more in there where it wasn't as clear as follow this process, but it was like, well, figure out your own process and send it in, right? That does
Right.
create a lot of burden for every faculty member, every administrator to sort of figure all that out. I think in general, if people know the process to follow and they are able to access it and follow that process, that can reduce a lot of stress for people. And so I think systems really can help us create a process that people understand and can access and can do. And that makes things just easier across the board for people to do what we're asking them to do.
Yeah, there was I was reading EAB recently, a great resource, and they talked about 5 opportunities to get the most from your remote workforce. And you just talked about the virtualization and how do you improve processes for those virtual employees, which is, very important to do. And, making sure the systems that everybody has access to are giving them the tools they need remote as well as they do, in the workplace. And then, another big part of the staff morale is, how do you cultivate engagement, with a remote workforce? I personally manage 5 people all across the country, and it's a challenge from my old days of being in an office where everybody was there and you could go out for coffee or whatever after work. And now that's not there with remote employees. And it's a challenge for me to come up with creative ways to keep them engaged. And how do you foresee schools and universities keeping their employees engaged as well as connected to the mission and having that real sense of belonging to something bigger? So many schools, people go to college there and then they work there, right? They love that university and they want to be there forever. And if they're remote, how do you keep those people with that same kind of esprit de corps when they're, working from home and maybe not even, in the same state? So is that something you've been thinking about with your peers at the university?
Yeah, I think we have been really thinking about that at each department level, is how do we stay engaged with our staff and keep them engaged with the university? Right, a lot of people stay in higher ed because of that mission, that they're really connected to the mission of higher ed. They're connected to the institution, and often these their alumni, right? Those kinds of things. And I do think that that's going to be harder to maintain in a remote work world. So right now, pre-pandemic, right, you got that by being on campus and surrounded by students and engaging and just walking through your student union, maybe attending athletic events and feeling really connected to the culture of K-State for us, right? The culture. And I think that's going to be different in a remote work world. And I think we are all concerned about how does that impact morale? How does that perhaps, right, create turnover for staff who maybe lose that connection and miss that? So how do we keep that really a strong connection for our employees and for students, right? Because for the student experience, it's not just their instructor and those front-facing folks, but it's knowing that there are people across campus who are available for help and questions and seeing, I think, faces that are in support of them. And that'll be a little different if we're kind of reducing our on-campus workload. So I do think that's a concern about really just how do we maintain morale for our staff and students, really as we're looking at this remote world and staying really engaged. I know in private industry, remote work has a longer history maybe than in higher education. So I'm sure there are some lessons we can all learn from private industry and think about how those adapt maybe to the higher education culture.
And actually,
Yeah,
Mandy, I'm sorry, John, but
no, Kevin, please go.
A question came in from one of the audience members about specifically how do you calm fears of job losses in the reorganization when you keep talking about efficiencies? That's usually a trigger word for the labor force, right?
And I think historically, right, we've used it as kind of a euphemism for some staff reduction or something. Really, I think part of it is just the clear communication that you can provide from administration and executive leadership. Some of it is going to just be history, right? What have you done? So we've been doing shared services for 4.5 years now. And we haven't had to terminate people. That hasn't been what our goal has been. And so I think part of it is being able to talk clearly about what the gains are from these efficiencies and where you think to really see reduced costs. And if it is in staff, to be able to understand, is that through attrition? Is that, what is that? But I would love to see us find a way to sort of separate the efficiency conversation from staffing conversation. And we've done that kind of by talking about, as we said earlier, right? It's about freeing people up to focus on the mission, not necessarily about finding reductions and savings. So that's kind of how we've done shared services, is really to be able to do that, to free up staff to focus on other things. It's hard to do that when you have declining budget at the same time, because then you often have cuts for other reasons that are challenging.
Yeah, and I think if you look at the private sector or the non-education workforce, technology has been probably a bigger part of the culture than the university setting, and the labor force has not gone down, right? There's always something different that comes along that requires additional work, and losing talent is the number one risk organizations face, right? Like that's KPMG, recently did a study on that. You don't want to lose people. It's very expensive and costly to lose people, to retrain people. You want that institutional knowledge of a university to be, constantly there. And I think the biggest thing is, we have to solicit feedback, get that constant sharing and that shared governance that has always existed in higher ed, but getting that feedback on a continual basis from the employees in every manner that you can. There's obviously electronic tools out there that can help with that and facilitate that. But at the end of the day, I think it's managers like yourself and others on campus, making sure their employees still feel connected and heard, even though they might be hundreds or thousands of miles away. And it's vital to keep that relationship, and it's about the trust, right? And if your employees trust that you're transparent with them and you communicate with them, then I think it will give them that sense of security that they need, especially now, because even when we come out of this pandemic, there's still going to be fears about the workforce, about the next pandemic that people are going to have, and it's really about just being transparent and communicating with them. And I think that's the best thing we can do. We can all do.
I think you're reading one of our audience members' minds, because another question just came in that they're curious about strategic planning that has gone into your communications plan, both to make students and staff feel comfortable with efforts to create a safe return, as you were saying, John, and also plans for if there's an eventual or a sporadic outbreak going into the future. Mandy, can you talk to any of those aspects?
I can kind of share how our university leadership has been communicating throughout the pandemic. One of the things is that you can't communicate enough, and you've always communicated too little, right? I mean, so you struggle with like, how do we keep people engaged and involved and try to meet those communication needs, and especially in a time when we don't have the answers and we don't always know either. Right, at our institution, they've done a lot of like town halls using Zoom, where students, faculty, staff are all invited to attend a town hall that's really led by our president and provost, and they answer questions and they share the updated statistics about what's happening with COVID. We have one of our leads from our student health center who also participates in those town halls and actually talks about the virus, the vaccine, the outbreak. What are we seeing? What are our concerns? We have had, we've actually been on campus this year. So we've had a dual modality. So we're doing a hybrid online in-person classes. Some are fully online, some are fully, in person, some are somewhere in between. And so that's required a ton of communication for faculty, really within their departments, with their students. What does that look like? And then how do they respond immediately to some kind of need? So I think, really the open forums and town halls, we have a daily email that comes out that often has, a list of different articles, but that's where we primarily communicate with faculty, staff, and students about what's happening on campus on a daily basis. We have that communication line. So I think those things all help, but you're never going to communicate enough, right?
And John, how about you? Have any experiences with some of the other folks that you're in contact with when
Yeah,
it comes to
exactly. So,
communication plans?
yeah, the universities that we talk to, it's a big part of their planning. What they're trying to think about, and it's really what I've heard a lot is being nimble um, and flexible, because you can't know. You need the strategic planning. You need to look at 12 months and 60 months out, but knowing that that plan can change at the drop of a hat, like it did last March. That everything changes, and it's the ability to shift priorities and get prepared. And higher ed really, higher ed and K-12 are probably the two organizations or the two areas, spaces of our country that probably did the best job. They get the most grief, in my opinion, I would say, but it was a seismic shift last March, where you went from educating brick and mortar to educating online and having IT infrastructure and Zoom and all these other resources that need to be harnessed, given to, and people, working now, employees working remote and students being at home, and bandwidth issues, and it really answered the call. And I think that's something that I think is going to make what we've heard from the people we talked to is it's going to make the organization stronger and more capable to handle issues in the future, as they really learned a lot about their leadership team and the organization and how they can better prepare in the future. And it really comes down to, just being prepared, being able to act quickly. And the schools, the universities that did it the best are the ones that are thriving right now. But there's still a lot that has to come around, especially when you talk about employees that are working remotely. And, what's the equity of people that are working from home, don't have a desk, that don't have a chair, that don't have a mouse pad, and all these other things that they're used to in the home environment, the work environment, now is at home. And how do colleges answer that from a fairness standpoint, as well as a financial standpoint? How much do you give an employee to work remote? How much, who is remote, who isn't? So there's a lot of other factors that I think need to be figured out in order for the colleges to really prepare for that in the future.
Yeah. So it's at that time that we have another poll question for the audience. What are the main challenges with continuing remote work post-pandemic at your institution? There are going to be some questions about whether or not you're going to have it at all or not. I think more and more is starting to look like there will be some sort of hybrid and remote solution. If there wasn't one already in the works, it's only been accelerated now. But what challenges do you see out there? Is it the policies? Is it the buy-in by leadership? Is it the tech itself? Questions or concerns about productivity? And then John was just mentioning the ideas of fairness and equity and being able to provide a service to making sure people who are on that other end are receiving it. So we'll give you a couple seconds to fill out that poll. These are just huge, pivotal questions for higher ed in general right now. It's really, as a journalist, it's an exciting time to watch it. But as a parent of one student in college and two, hopefully about to go there, it's also downright frightening, right? So here are the results there. And again, pretty even across the board, but fairness and equality taking the top lead there. I kind of find that interesting that's of top of mind to a lot of our audience. That's a good thing that it is, but really kind of an interesting, on top of the leadership buy-in. So I'm hopeful that 26% means that the leadership has already bought in. So we don't have to worry about at least 2/3, right? So moving on to trend number 3 here. And again, it's kind of a dovetail to what we were talking about before, that remote work will continue for many employees. And I don't think we're just talking about professors. I mean, we're talking about administrators, and we're talking about a lot of maybe third-party operators that are out there. The stats here we have at 48% currently plan to work remotely after the pandemic. So half, right? If my math is right, it's almost half. And then you can see what that means for the other numbers, the costs, and how that can help. Mandy, maybe you can start off and talk a little bit about this particular trend.
Mhm. Yeah, and it kind of ties to one of the questions in the Q&A about like, how do we reintegrate when people come back to campus? And I think part of the answer is we might never have a full comeback to campus moment, right? If remote work really continues for half of employees, our campuses will look really different. But I think the question is really good. How do we sort of integrate these different communities that will be created? So you're going to have your remote workers, you're going to have your on-campus workers, you're going to have your students who are on campus and online, right? All of these different constituencies, and how do we continue to be one university with one mission? I don't know that I have, a really great answer. I think remote work is likely to continue, and we're going to have to figure that out. How do we keep people connected to the mission? And John, I don't know if you're hearing from other institutions any really innovative ways they're thinking this through or tackling this question.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a big question, and we only have 24 minutes left here, so I don't think we're going to solve the world's problems here in the next 24 minutes. But I think the biggest shift is rethinking looking at students and from a consumer standpoint, and how do they want to be engaged with, right? Especially when you talk about the generation, do they want to wait in line at the bursar's office or financial services or for academic advising? I would venture to say they would prefer just to do a Zoom academic advising, right? So does that academic advisor need to sit in a building on campus, right? Where you're paying for space and you're paying for them to be there, and they have to pay to commute to work, right? So there are things that a lot of schools we talk to are trying to reconsider, right? And some of these positions that traditionally have been on campus every day, 9 to 5, 5 days a week, that they're looking at this now. And that brings a lot of questions to bear around their job description, their fairness, right? Like who can work from home and who can't, right? Who's going to be on campus what days, right? How do we schedule that time if we're going to have those shared office spaces? And then will the university pay for me to stay at a hotel when I have to come on campus and I don't live nearby? And why does that person get a bigger stipend than I do? So there's a lot of things that come along with that. From a benefit for the university, there's a study done by Global Workforce Analytics where they estimated that 40% remote work by an employee will save over $7 million for every 1,000 employees, right? So there's efficiencies for the university, cost savings. It's still people working, but it's the cost savings, and the employees save money, right? Because they don't have to be on campus. But then how do you keep them productive? How do you track that? One of the things that a lot of universities are struggling with is how do you track their productivity, right? There a lot of hourly or employees are used to, but salaried employees are not used to clocking in and clocking out in their day. But if they're at home, is that something that's going to be required? And then once again, from an equity standpoint, a fairness and HR policy standpoint, how do you tackle that part of the equation of monitoring, tracking their performance at home versus on the campus?
Yeah, and John,
answer
that dovetails into another question. It's great. Thank you, everyone, for sending in the questions. It really helps add to the conversation. We have one participant asking that our college has been open throughout the pandemic. This has created multiple constituencies: faculty coming to campus versus faculty working remotely, staff, administration, and students, just what we're talking about. This is bifurcated. Now that you're using higher ed words to try to make me stumble over it, bifurcated the sense of a single campus community. What strategies, Mandy, would you recommend when more come back to campus to reintegrate the campus community?
Yeah, and this is one I think that we don't have our hands around fully yet, because we don't know what it's going to look like to come back to campus. Now at K-State, we have announced that we're going to reopen campus on August 1st, and the plan is to have staff come back to campus. Okay. Part of that reintegration will be restarting. I think in the pandemic, our work got much narrower, and so it became about the job you need to do. and some of the collaboration, cross-divisional conversations stopped. And I think figuring out how to restart those, whether that's remotely or in person, so that your facilities team is engaging with your finance team again, and really having those conversations. I think that will be part of it. Part of it is going to be just like life beginning to resume as we're able to go to sporting events and to have our kickoff celebrations at, welcome back kind of things. I think that'll help. But I do think as we continue remote work, I'm concerned about that bifurcation of staff and faculty if we continue a permanent remote work plan.
Yeah, and another comment that came in about, and wondering about how you feel about the intrusion of work into home life and the effects on worker morale. Like, I suspect that's one thing that now that we're working from home and the expectation of checking those emails or checking a text will be very difficult for the institutions to say, oh, no, you don't have to check them anymore. You can get back to us on Monday, right, John? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Once again, a great EDUCAUSE study recently, 70% of employees said that the remote work allows a healthy work-life balance. But as that continues, what are the expectations that the university is going to have of when is a response, appropriate? And the 9 to 5 atmosphere has kind of crept in on the private sector for a long time now. They hand you that company provided device and that company laptop, and there's a different expectation. So I'm sure there's fears on campus about the intrusion of, what is my time and what is the university's time. And we've heard that from a lot of schools, and, giving employees that sense of fairness that, your time is going to be your time, and, we're not going to intrude on that. But the collaboration that Mandy talked about was huge. One of the main things we've talked about is, projects across a large group has been one of the things that has been kind of lost. The individual work of getting your job done is helped. But one of the things we've had a lot of schools tell us is really hard are the bigger projects on campus, especially if it's a technology project. And you have people some are home, some are high flex, some are on campus, and getting them to collaborate and work better is something that they're struggling with. And I think it's a part of it's a learning process, an educational process with having that strategy and alignment for those processes in the future are going to be important. So, it's up for a lot of conversation about how you handle that in the future.
Mm.
Yeah, and I kind of want to comment on that intrusion of work into home life. From my perspective, a lot of that really drives from the supervisor or the manager. So institutionally, I think we can give some resources and some guidance, but that expectation is usually coming from that the person who's actually wanting to contact you. So I think as managers and supervisors, we have to be really cognizant of our employees' work time and when it is not work time, and understand what can wait and what can't wait. And so I know, we've had some conversations internally with our team about when we went to the pandemic, we said, just get your work done. Whenever works for you, whatever works, right? People had kids at home. They had all kinds of things happening. As we get further in this, we're finding that, gosh, if everybody works from 4 a.m. to noon, which is not unusual for my staff, crazy to me. But if everybody works from 4 a.m. to noon, we can't answer any questions after afternoon, right? But we don't want to have everybody be on call or something. That's going to be an intrusion into the home life. So starting to think about what are reasonable schedules and how can we be flexing those out so that we can cover the need and not have to really engage people when they're not on shift, right? I think that is going to be something that we're going to have to be really cognizant of as we continue remote work, as managers, as supervisors, understanding the separation of work and home and ensuring that we protect that for our employees.
Yeah, this is the easiest moderating job in the world, because just as you were answering that, a question came in that, do you see a need for management training to give them a different set of tools to alter their approach to leadership once back on campus? So can you go a little bit deeper into that? And when you talk about management training, is it a a Zoom call? Is it a professional development workshop? What do you see that being?
Mhm. I mean, I think it's partially things like this too, right? Leaders getting together and talking about what works, what doesn't work, how are they protecting their employees, those kinds of things. I do think that that's a training need that we'll see in higher ed is how to manage a continuing remote staff. And I do think as people come back, I think the question was about as they return to work and they haven't needed a manager, and now suddenly they have a manager again. I think just understanding how we manage our employees and being really flexible and transparent about what that might look like. So we've talked about, we always had a policy pre-pandemic that if our office was open, one of the managers had to be there. I don't know if that's still valid, right? Suddenly,
Yeah.
it's like, well, you didn't need us there for the last year. I don't know if you really need us there. Can our office be open without a manager? Those are things we're still working through to figure out what is that really going to look like when we come back to work. I think for a lot of employees, I think they have missed some of the engagement with management. And I think there are some good things that can come back when we go back to work. I know one of the things we had kind of talked about is, an employee used to be able to just grab their manager in passing and ask a quick question. And it was relatively easy to connect, and it's much harder to connect now. So we've been thinking about things like doing Zoom office hours for me, where I just sit on Zoom, my staff can jump in. I let them come in from the waiting room. We talk about whatever they need, they jump out, right? And it can be 5 minutes, it can be 20 minutes, because they are missing some of that engagement. So I think there are things that we need to understand has been missed in the pandemic that we want to come back, whether remote or in person. And there are things that maybe we thought were necessary that maybe aren't necessary. And how do we really start to understand those and adapt our management philosophy?
Yeah,
John, from your perspective, John, what do you say?
one of the things we've heard from a lot of colleges was, if you're remote, how will that affect your advancement opportunities? Right? That's like been a big question at a lot of schools. As we talk to HR organizations, how do we manage that? How do we make sure that employees feel like they have all the opportunities as a remote employee, that they might not have the advantage of being down the hall from their manager and can talk to them more often and get that coaching in a constant state versus just the once a week or once a month one-on-one on a Zoom or a phone call that you just don't feel quite as engaged. So I do think, like you said, Mandy, I think it's the management retraining. I think it's the HR policies of setting standards of expectations. And, probably the biggest word I'd have with all this is adaptive, and just being willing to know that. And I think the biggest thing for the employees is we're all going to learn this together. Mm-hmm. Come September 1st, and some of you remote, some of you in person, and some, hybrid, we're going to learn together and we're going to stumble, but I think the goal, as long as the goal that everybody has is success, and that we want everybody to be fair and equitable in what they do, I just think that's what the messaging just needs to be, is that we're going to learn together. We're trying to make it work, but we want to make it better for everybody. Like 48% want to be remote. Now, if you look at some of the management stats, I think it's a little bit lower. I think that, like, CIOs say 35%, and some schools, I think it's 4% of schools say they don't want remote at all. So the majority of schools do want remote. And I just think that it's going to be a learning environment for everybody. And August 1st, when the doors open up at K-State, that the employees are going to have a lot of questions. And it's going to open up a lot of opportunities for managers to engage with their employees and learn together.
Yeah, I agree. I think it goes back to that communication we talked about early on, being transparent about we're doing our best and we're going to figure this out as we go. And, even the policy work, we had a telecommuting policy, very pandemic, antiquated, right? It doesn't fit the world we're talking about now. And so how do we build policies to support this work, support managers in this work and employees in this, and just being really engaged with the campus community about where we're going and what this is going to look like, but knowing that that's all flexible and adaptable as we get more information.
Yeah.
So another question coming in, one attendee, our school has a large online student body and support team. Have you figured out how to replace awards, certificates, and tenure that used to be displayed at their physical workstation. This was a big part of our culture and employee identity that we haven't figured out how to replace remotely. Any thoughts there, Mandy?
Yeah, I think for us, it hasn't been something we've really focused on. I was on an EAB conversation, I think it was last week, kind of around this, and there were some really interesting ideas from other schools where they've done like badges that can be right added to your email. They did some things with actual like going to someone's home and putting a sign in their yard. I don't know, what your culture supports, but I thought the kind of badges idea was a really interesting approach to that, so that people could see that sort of that recognition maybe in the email if that's where they're primarily communicating. They also, one of the schools had shared ideas about, they'd created an award website where they actually were like updating regularly award winners across the campus on this website, which then could be shared through their email communication. Here are this week's award winners, that kind of thing. I don't know that it'll replace what culturally was really valuable, but some ideas that I have heard about other institutions and what they're doing there.
That's great. John, have you heard of anything similar in your travels?
Very similar. The badging, the ability to use their technology platforms, their HCM platforms to share awards or certificates that people get that normally would be hanging on their cubicle, their wall, so that other employees, when they engage with them, they know, kind of all the great accomplishments and things they've done. So that badging, that technology platform to share success is definitely one of the things that a lot of schools are looking into right now.
Yeah. Well, we're starting to run up towards the end of the presentation. I do have one kind of question that I kind of like to finish up and ask. Both of you have, as we all have, gone through the ringer this past year, but specifically in this environment that we're talking about. Mandy, are there any innovations or any technologies or techniques that have been developed that either you did at Kansas State or you found elsewhere that were a surprise, where you kind of said, you know what, we should have been doing it this way all along? And any examples of that off the top of your head?
Yeah, the one I feel like other folks have been surprised by is the kind of office hours for managers. So like they would offer, here's this, I'll be on Zoom for these 2 hours every week, which super common in our instructional world, right? Teachers have office hours, and that's kind of where I was like, gosh, maybe we just need some office hours. And doing that for remote workers is not something I've heard a lot of, and I wish that I had done that earlier. And then, right, part of my team is our HR staff, and we realized that we've been having open office hours all year, but no way to really connect with remote workers. So doing office hours there as well, where one of my staff is on Zoom available for any employee who wants to jump into the waiting room and have a conversation. I think that's something that will be very helpful for us in an ongoing basis too. And I wish we had thought of it earlier.
Yeah. How about you, John? Anything across your experiences?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest shift or demand that we've seen from a UKG perspective is the technology to enable organizations to connect with their employees, especially from an HR perspective. When employees they want to engage when they want to. They don't want to have to ask a question or call someone, between 9 and 5 or 9 and 4. The ability for them to just, when they're home, 8, 9 o'clock, they put the kids to bed, and then them and their spouse have the new, work at home policy or, FMLA, et cetera. That's when they really need help. And there's a lot of technology out there that enables them to engage, get those cases, those questions answered easily, quickly, allow them to fill out forms right online, and not have to, kind of do that in an office setting, and especially where a lot of these employees are remote. So that's probably one of the biggest things we've seen over the past, 6 or 9 months is organizations are looking to engage with employees where they are, right? Like that's the biggest thing with technology. In the private sector is you engage with consumers where they want to be engaged with. And I think a lot of employees, especially some of those HR questions, I think from a home setting is where they want to engage with that, or in a personal setting. So I think that technology allows them to do that So it allows them to connect, but in a very personal way.
Yeah. So while we all have Zoom fatigue of one degree or another, there are certain aspects of it that we can continue to take advantage of, which is doing the one-to-one with an HR manager. Why do I need to drive 90 minutes into the office and sit there in order to answer these 5 minutes of questions, right? So, and with that, I'll ask one more question. Which one of these techniques or innovations do you hope really don't stick around? What are you not going to miss when we go back to whatever the new normal is? I'll start with you, Mandy. I'll put you on the hot seat, Mandy.
Oh, got this extra time to think.
I'll jump in. I would say, making sure that employees, especially when they're working from home, that they're getting the work-life balance that they need, because it is going to continue to be a struggle to work from home. And, if you're in the Northeast like me with the seasonal disorders that a lot of people get when they're kind of trapped in that, I go from my bedroom to my office, and sometimes my office is my bedroom.
Yeah.
My employee health and, their mindset and their overall well-being is something that is going to be tough to gauge, because they're not going to be walking into the office and you can see and sense that someone is having some personal difficulties. So using those open office hours like Mandy talked about, and just being really aware and giving employees, UKG does a great job of it, and making sure that everybody takes the time they need for vacation and end meetings 5 minutes early, so you can get up, walk around, get off the Zoom fatigue. So I think employee health is probably the biggest thing that we need to make sure stays with this as we move forward.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the one thing we've really missed that I'll be happy to have back will be in-person collaboration, multi-departmental collaboration. And we've kind of tried to maintain it in Zoom, but it's something that just doesn't seem to work as effectively. Just that, like, what's going on in your world and what's happening in mine, and how can we solve problems together? Isn't something that has been very easy to replicate in Zoom. So I'll be glad to have that back. And won't be sad to see those Zoom meetings go where we just kind of are like, this isn't helping us connect.
Right. And maybe you say in-person collaboration. I also involve Pizza Friday with that somehow, right? Or maybe a cocktail hour once in a while. Well, thanks again. Our time is about up, and so I'm going to wrap it up. If you submitted a question that we didn't get to in the Q&A portion, someone will definitely from UKG will follow up you directly. I'd like to thank John and Mandy, our presenters today, for a very informative and insightful presentation. And I'd also like to thank all the audience members for joining us as well. It was really, this is how it's supposed to work, right? With just interactive questions, and didn't have to use the seed questions or anything. So as a reminder, you'll get an email within the next few days that contains a link to this recording along with the slides. Thanks again for participating, and have a great day.
Thank you, Kevin.